Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
So Thursday morning, Veterans Day, um,
Yes, yes, yes.
a day that was initially Armistice Day, commemoration of, I believe the war dead of World War I. Correct? Or was it necessarily war dead, or is it just celebrating those who served?
Well, I mean, I don't know, but Veterans Day obviously celebrates those who served. So let's just wish anyone out there, fans of the DMZ, who served, thank you for your service to our country. Happy Veterans Day, Bill. All four of my mother's brothers served. Two Marines, one Army, one Air Force. Um, And I got to visit when I was like 12. We got to go to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and spend a week with my uncle, who was a gunny sergeant in the Marines. And he did something I was like a 12-year-old who just loved this stuff. Like I can imagine my kids today loving this. And he would get during training, if he knew I was coming, he would get up his troops or whatever in the middle of the night and move them. And they would let stuff behind. And we would come in later and I would find cool Army stuff or Marine stuff that they'd left behind. And it was part of their training and it was great for me. But I suspect, Bill, that increasingly a lot of families don't have any connection to the military these days.
Well, sure, it's going to be less and less. We don't have a draft anymore. The people who volunteer for the military is a very small percentage of the country. I don't have much military service in my family. I think my uncle served briefly. I don't even know if it was combat or not. I don't think it was. I have an ancestor who served in the Civil War for the North, and was captured by the South.
I like my heroes who don't get captured. Oh. I have an ancestor. This is interesting. So I have an ancestor who served for the North, Pennsylvania, and he held my grandmother on his lap when she was little. So I'm literally 1 degree of separation from the Civil War,
Wow.
which seems insane. Yeah. But that's the way it works.
Well, I think we still have one grandson left of John Tyler's, President John Tyler. I know one passed away recently, but I think there's still one more.
Yeah. But anyway, he probably sired that grandchild when he was like 80, right?
Yeah, it's just something like that.
Yeah.
So,
wait. No, before we get into business.
Okay.
Are you a fan of the Rocky movies?
I mean, I was a kid. I haven't watched any of the new ones. You know, as a kid, I saw 1 through 4.
Okay. So, did you know that Stallone, who is, I think, underrated in terms of like his artistic, intelligent side of Stallone, because he made all these ridiculous movies, people don't realize, like the first Rocky movie, won Picture of the Year in 1976. I mean, maybe it didn't deserve it, but it did. The first movie, First Blood, I think it's a great movie.
Over the Top.
There you go. There you go.
Wasn't he one of this? What was he? Movie? Didn't even a Stell Getty movie, like "Don't Tell Someone the Mama's Dead" or something?
Stop or my mom.
There we go.
No, but Stallone has gone back into the studio and re-edited Rocky IV and made it. I haven't seen it yet. It's going to be one night. I think you can go to the theaters and see it soon.
Like Photoshop Putin or something.
In fact, that date may have passed.
Is there Photoshop Putin
re-edited it? I think he's taken. What's that?
Is he Photoshop Putin in or something?
No, I think he did take the robot out. He took out the robot, and I think he made it. So, and Stallone says that he wishes if he had it to do over, he would have had Apollo Creed live, and just be crippled or in a wheelchair. sort of as his new Mickey. So anyway, Bill, I throw that out to you. I'm a fan, and if you were here physically in West Virginia, I think that would be a great mandate for us to go see Rocky IV remastered
in the theater.
Of course, we share a popcorn, my man.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, do you know what the date is on that?
I don't. It's like it might have even just happened, but I'm assuming, yeah, it's either coming up this week or it just happened. But I'm assuming we'll be able to pay to watch it, and I'm literally excited about that. There's not a lot of things in my life that will legitimately make me excited, but I really would want to see this. So I will pay
when they remaster Red Dawn. Then you and I will make.
I'm getting ready. It's funny you mentioned that. I just showed my kids the trailer for that, and I'm getting ready to watch it with my kids. Here's what I didn't realize. Do you know that it was at the time when it came out, like in the mid 80s, it was the most violent movie ever made?
I didn't know it had that. I remember there was a lot of violence in it. And you're okay with that? You're okay showing your kids the hardcore violence?
Well, I think there's violence and violence. There's gratuitous violence, and like I wouldn't show them that, or horror movies, I wouldn't show them that. This is a patriotic movie about young people, let's say like Kyle Rittenhouse, who are taking back. I'm joking, of course. I'm trolling you. I'm trolling you, Bill. But I think I'm okay with it. I think it's going to be good. And you know, it's obviously a classic, Bill. You said it yourself.
I mean, it is a classic. I don't know if someone like if my two kids wanted to see violent movies, I would probably let them. Maybe not when they were young, but I might at this point.
Yeah.
But they have absolutely no interest. They would be actively horrified and rattled and upset to see the kind of violence.
Let me tell you. So let me tell you where we're at in my house. My youngest boy turns 9 in a couple days, and his big gift, I could pull it out of my closet right now, it's like I forget what they call it. It's like a backpack that if you were a survivalist, or like it's called a bug out bag or something. It's like a backpack for survivalists, full of like things that you like, stuff you would need if you were like on the run. And his big birthday thing, we're taking him to this resort out to lunch. And last year we went there and we did zip lining. This year we're doing, he's going on some sort of survival training for 3 hours, like in the woods. So I'm not sure what that will entail, but that's kind of where we're at. So I think Red Dawn is in his wheelhouse.
An instructional manual for what do you do when you're in the woods and the Russians come? Are you prepared?
Well, God forbid if the Chinese, apparently they've got aerial photography and they're building aircraft carrier, model aircraft carriers to invade. I hope that our children do not have to defend. Here we come back to Veterans Day. I hope that our children and our grandchildren are not summoned or not called upon to defend this country from China or some aggressor, Russia. But if they are, then the backpack might come in handy, Bill. And the movie could be good training.
Well, if your kids are ready for Red Dawn, I think you should absolutely show them V.
The alien movie.
Yeah, I think V is one of the greatest cultural products of the 80s. And I've rewatched it recently. It totally holds up.
Yeah, this is like a mini series.
It's a mini. Right? I mean, there's two mini series. There's V and V: The Final Battle. Both excellent. Both have some political message. Pro science, anti-fascism.
I was you know what would be in their wheelhouse, but I'm not going to show them this yet. This is way too violent. Is World War Z? Is they would like, but it's too intense. I watched the trailer and it's not. But but let me say that oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I never saw World War Z. That's Max Brooks, right?
Right. The book is really good. Then there was a movie with Brad Pitt that is also good, but not as good as the book.
When I was really, really young, I was friends with Max Brooks.
Oh, that's right. I think you told me that before.
Like 3 or 4, and like I've had no contact with them since, and he would not know me.
Try to reach out, though.
He would never remember me in any respect. But I remember. I mean, I definitely met Mel Brooks and Anne Bancroft from being at his place. I have zero memory of it. And when I was a little bit older, and like the Muppet movie was on TV, and my mom was like, because Mel Brooks is a cameo in that, and my mom was like, "That's Max's dad." And I was like, "Cameo in the Muppet movie, whatever." I had no concept that he was like one of the biggest names of all of show business and comedy. I
think that's kind of not as big. It's not as big, but like, I have these experiences where like Caitlin Collins, who's now a big star on CNN, used to babysit my kids, and I tell them that stuff. It's surreal. But my oldest boy is now reading, like, in addition to the weird anime, which we'll talk about, the Paul Gozar video, in addition to the anime that he reads and the young adult fiction stuff that he reads a lot of political books. He's read David Drucker's book, David Frum, he thinks is brilliant. Jonah Goldberg, he loves. He's reading Suicide of the West, and he's reading my friend Stephen Kent's book about how Star Wars, how the Force can save the world. So it's an interesting time right now in the Lewis household as we
now how old?
As we hit that age.
How old?
So my oldest boy is going to be 11 in a couple months, and my youngest boy is going to be 9 in a couple days.
That's an unusual reading list for 11.
And the weird thing is, he takes it to school and reads it there too. And I'm like, I asked him the other day, I'm like, you're reading this book called How the Force Can Save the World, and it's about Star Wars and politics. And I'm like, does your teacher like mention that, or does anybody like notice this or think it's odd? And like, no, surprisingly, no one says anything. But he's like, but I've realized that I do have a larger vocabulary than some of the kids. I'm like, well, yeah. That's like, how many 9-year-olds know what infrastructure is? But I can guarantee you they do.
None of my reading has rubbed off on my children in any respect. So.
All right. Well, I always like to loosen things up with that. So
let's talk about Kyle Rittenhouse. Now we're loose. Let's talk Rittenhouse.
Yeah, let's do. Okay. So have you watched any of the trial?
I've not really watched it. I saw the clip yesterday where he had his breakdown. But otherwise, I'm not in the play-by-play of it. I mean, I think I got a little bit here and there. But so I know you have deeper thoughts on this than perhaps I do, but I'm happy to listen and react.
Sure. I mean, so I watched a few hours of it yesterday. I'm not an expert, but it appears likely that there's either going to be an acquittal, or that there'll be a mistrial.
Is this a jury trial or just the judge?
This is a jury. I'm pretty sure it's a jury trial.
Okay, because I know the judge has been charged with putting his thumb on the scale to Rittenhouse, but that doesn't tell us what the jury's going to think.
Yeah, and I read something in the Washington Post about how this judge he's a weird dude, but this is consistent with his MO. Like he's sort of like very pro defense. The defense just in general. It is interesting. There was a moment yesterday when his phone went off. The judge's phone went off during the trial, and it appeared to be playing like the Muzak version of Lee Greenwood's "God Bless the USA." Interestingly, as I pointed out, though, the notes that were played sound also, they could have been from Crosby, Stills, and Nash's Southern Cross. Never thought of it before, but if you go back and listen to that tape, those notes are identical. So anyway, it's unclear, but I think some people were saying like, "Oh, he must be a Trump voter if he's listening to Lee Greenwood." You know, if that's his ringtone.
Well, again, I'm not the Jeffrey Toobin of this discussion. I'm not steeped in the case. I'm not steeped in the law. Why you're listening to me on the subject, I have no idea.
I won't make any joke. Okay.
But I do think, just as a general matter, like my personal opinion is this kid had no business being there. It is ludicrous that he came armed, and he put himself in a situation where, the worst case scenario happened. I mean, this is why advocates of restrictive gun ownership say it's not a good idea to have, a expansively interpreted Second Amendment where we're all vigilantes, because this is exactly the kind of thing that can happen. Whereas conflicts that occurred without, assault rifles are less deadly. So I carry no brief for him, but it would not shock me at all that the circumstances of what happened are at least murky enough that there would be some reasonable doubt that he was acting in self-defense and he would get acquitted. I mean, if that happens, I don't think the takeaway is that the justice system is unfair. The justice system is designed to set a very high standard for a conviction. And I understand people might look at it in a racial lens and say, well, if this was an African-American defendant, he wouldn't get the same slack. And that may well be, but that's a failure on the part of those situations where African Americans are being held to an unfairly low standard. It doesn't mean you want to drag other people down to lower standards and convict more people on shakier evidence. So yeah. I mean, we should always remember that the system is designed to acquit people. The system is designed to make sure it's really, really hard to acquit people. And if it works in that way, that doesn't mean that we turn a blind eye to white vigilantes.
I agree with most of what you said, but I think part of the problem is that what you've just espoused, I think, is actually an old-fashioned liberal notion about due process and about erring on the side of the defendant and the accused. And I think the problem is that a lot of people today are unfamiliar with that, based on probably a failure of our educational system or civics, or they don't believe it. They think that it's an immoral thing, that it's not justice. And so I think that there's a problem where a lot of people in America don't buy into this liberal notion of due process and erring on the side of the defense. And I also think this is aided by a mainstream media, which until yesterday has not really presented the realities of this case. In other words, I think that there may be a lot of people who are shocked if he is acquitted. That they'll like, how could this be? I've been watching TV and they keep telling me that he's obviously guilty. That he was chasing people around and shooting them in cold blood. So I think that there could be some backlash here if he is acquitted.
Well, I mean, people are going to react to the verdict whichever way it goes in a polarized way. At least the people who are watching the most intently are the people who are on opposite sides of the political fence, and they're going to react in predictable ways. There's just no getting around that.
Yeah.
But and it may well be that this judge was not impartially, and that would be legitimate grounds for an appeal. Like I'm not saying that whatever this verdict is, that whichever side that loses needs to accept it and move on. I mean, there could very well be grounds for appeal either way. You gotta let that process play out.
Well, let me let me just say, like, based on my understanding, which is limited, where I think the judge has put his thumb on the scale, so to speak, or where there may be some criticism. So one thing is, I guess when Rittenhouse was first arrested, he didn't talk, and it seems like the prosecution was trying to suggest or imply that that was like almost an admission of guilt or something. And I think the judge was like, no, you have the right to remain silent. This is fundamental part of the American system. So I think the judge clearly in that case was right. I think the more debatable question was whether, so there are pictures of Kyle Rittenhouse wearing a shirt that says like free as fuck, taking pictures. In some cases, I'm not sure if it's this instance, but taking pictures with some unseemly characters.
Mm-hmm.
And this was like months. I believe it was months after the incident. And the question was whether that could be introduced as evidence about his character and his lack of remorse. And I think the judge said, like, no, the question is the night that these people were shot and killed, is he guilty? Was that self-defense at that time or not? And it's irrelevant how he behaved 4 months later or whatever. To me, I mean, again, I'm not a lawyer, but to me, that sounds like a reasonable thing for a judge to say, is that we're going to exclude that as evidence.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you get to introduce new stuff in the sentencing portion, but if he was found guilty and then you're trying to determine his sentence, like that would seem to make sense. Okay, let's see if he has remorse or not before sentencing. But it's not relevant whether the act itself was a criminal act or not. But so often we look at trials and we want there to be a winner or a loser based on our feelings about the person involved. I mean, I don't like Kyle Rittenhouse. He seems like a bad character from where I sit. Doesn't mean he's guilty of the crime.
Does he really, though? To me, okay, so Tim Carney over at the Washington Examiner wrote this really good piece a couple weeks ago called "Don't Take Your Guns to Town." And Bill, being a country music aficionado, I'm sure you're familiar with the Johnny Cash song.
I am. Yep.
And it's like a young cowboy grows restless on the plains, and it's something to do with he's filled with wanderlust, and his mom tells him, don't do this, don't take your guns to town. So this sort of young cowboy is filled with delusions of grandeur. He has to prove his masculinity, that he's a man, and he ends up getting killed. Takes his guns to town and gets killed. That's the moral of the story. To me, Kyle Rittenhouse seems like a guy who it was caught up in delusions of grandeur. He doesn't seem like a bad person. He didn't show up at a school and try to murder innocent people. He tried to go protect, it's not his community, but I think his dad lives in Waukesha or wherever in Wisconsin. But I think in his mind, he's the hero. Like, he was trying to provide medical.
I'm sure that's the case. I'm sure he thought of himself as the hero. I see nothing laudable in thinking I'm going to bring an assault rifle to a protest and be the hero. In a case where there's
protest, though, people were. It wasn't just a pro. I mean, there was violence and.
Well, because he was assuming that was going to be the case, and again, there was riotous activity going on there. I'm not denying that, but this is something that still was an outgrowth of what seemed to be a police shooting with potential racist motivation or a racial factor. And his impulse was to try to put down the people upset about potential racism and protect, people's properties who he had no idea were actually in danger or not. I mean, he was making assumptions about what was going to happen. I mean, he had no idea. It wasn't like the car dealership was under siege. We need reinforcements. And then he grabs his gun and goes out there. He made an assumption that bad stuff's going to happen to these poor property owners, and he was going to take the lead in defending them. So for that to be the guy's impulse ahead of time, doesn't fill me with pride of his generosity.
I mean, it feels naive and quixotic and stupid and dangerous, but his motives were pure. He was trying to. So first of all, I don't think he had confidence that the police or the authorities could preserve law and order in that community. He's taking it upon himself to do that and provide medical attention, which seems like a lot of what he did. He put himself, I think, in a bad position. But like we do say to people, like, step up, take ownership over not his community, but over your community. That's a mixed message, I think.
When we say step up,
also, I think
go volunteer to clean up a river. Go join the PTO. go help out at a food bank. We don't encourage people to be vigilantes. We tell people that we entrust law and order to police officers. We don't tell people to take the law into their own hands. That's not something to praise.
I also think this has to do with, Josh Hawley's been talking about manhood and masculinity. And, I've been writing for over a decade now, homegrown domestic terrorism. Like, why do people who live in an affluent, prosperous, affluent, happy time and country, why do they become jihadists? And it has to do with, romance and purpose and meaning. And that, in the olden days, young men were summoned to be protectors in their community, and they were given respect in return as part of the deal. And now when you turn 16, you get to drive, and you turn 21, you get to drink. That's the big rite of passage. There aren't really rites of passage where you go out into the jungle and, slay a dragon, so to speak. And so I think that some of this is similar. I mean, Josh, Kyle Rittenhouse did not become a jihadist. He did like the right-wing version almost, which is seeking to be a protector, seeking kind of romance, and it was obviously misguided. And that's why I think the Wonderlust Johnny Cash song is apropos.
I've stressed this on a past show, but I feel so much history is driven by stupid young men with guns or other weapons. Teenagers, 20-somethings, like World War I, dumbass 20-something shoots the Archduke, and, the whole world's engulfed in flames. We need to channel, youthful energy into far more productive means that doesn't involve weaponry.
Well, I don't think look, if it wasn't a gun, it would be like, a Molotov cocktail, or this is human nature. There's something, we live in a fallen world, and there is evil, and I think you're right, but I don't think you could argue like access to guns, easy access makes it easier for these things to happen. But to me, the bigger problem is that we're effed up people, humanity. And I think that, I used to date a girl whose dad was a historian. And he told me, which I took as a threat. He told me that, all young men should be basically locked up until they turn 25. And then but he's actually right in terms of if you took all young men from about the age of 15 to 25 and just took them off the streets where they couldn't do any harm, crime would plummet. You know what I mean? And so would all sorts of other assaults of various types. I mean, young men, and that's why I'm raising two of them in my household, and they're beasts, Bill.
And
And my job
now
is
you're showing them Red Dawn. So let's be careful out there.
No, I need to civilize them, channel this in productive, proper ways, because you try to suppress this too much, bad stuff's going to happen too. But you channel it properly and do legitimately heroic and productive means. That's what I'm trying to do. Knock on wood.
Wolverines. Shall we? Should we shift gears, or do you have more to say about Rittenhouse?
No, I think I've probably already said more than I I know. And feel free to if I got anything wrong, chime in the comments and let us know. Bill will read them and let me know.
So getting back to Washington, I thought it was a big success to get the infrastructure bill over the line last week.
It feels like a month ago.
They haven't even signed it yet. Biden's got to do the bill signing, which is Monday.
Yeah.
I saw a Monmouth poll that came out yesterday where it was taken, I think, between Thursday and Monday, and the bill was passed, close to midnight Friday. So it's still early for this to filter through and get a reaction from it. But still, there's a lot of other events going around. You don't really feel like the press is flooded with victory lap stories. So I wouldn't assume just yet you get a poll bump, but maybe if the bill sign might be a little different.
Yeah. And interestingly, Bill, two things happened since then. So first, I would say since Biden passed, or since Democrats passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, Republicans did a whole bunch of crazy stuff, including that Paul Gosar anime video, including deciding to potentially target the 13 Republicans who dared to vote for it in the House, and including, this isn't crazy, but maybe it makes perfect sense, Chris Sununu's decision not to seek the Senate in New Hampshire, but simultaneously, sort of peeing on Biden's parade is numbers about inflation, which are not good.
Right. And these all kind of come together. I mean, you're seeing, disruptions in the force affecting both Democrats and Republicans in all this. And I think and all of it combined with, Rittenhouse trial, Trump January 6th, investigation. There's also the news out there that doesn't make the infrastructure bill the news story. And that's going to dull any immediate political impact. Although maybe if you get a big, grand bill signing on Monday with Democrats and Republicans staying side by side, maybe you'll get 24, 48 hours of a different coverage that might change things. But I do think
Mitch McConnell said it's a godsend to Kentucky.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not like it's. I mean, look, Trump's dumping on it. Steve Bannon told his people to call these people traitors. Then you have all these phone calls coming in to the 13. Now, most of these phone calls, these 13 House Republicans that voted yes, are out of district. So, it really seems like it's Bannonites from across the country. I mean, look, you get 100 phone calls in your district, like that disrupts your day. That feels like the world has come down upon you, but it isn't that many people. And it certainly isn't that many people in your own district. So it may well be that it was still a good vote for their own fortunes. And they're going to get some air cover from McConnell and others. I was just looking at.
I will say I do have. I completely understand why Republicans were angry at these 13, because when McConnell and the Senate, I think 10 Senate Republicans voted for this in August, that was a different world than what happened a couple days ago, where, what's the maxim, never interfere with your opponent when he's in the process of committing suicide. I mean, the Democrats, from a political standpoint, were in disarray, and they were having this they kept saying they were going to have the vote and they couldn't do it. And AOC was calling it BS, and like for Republicans to sort of come in and save Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats at that moment is different from what Senate Republicans did months ago when they signed on to the bill. I do understand the frustration.
Well, it's a fascinating legislative success, in large part for that reason. I mean, you had a period of time, and I got a piece coming out about this in the monthly. It might be up later today or maybe tomorrow. You had a period from really June to top of November where most of the driving force was mistrust. You had first, actually before June, Democrats telling the group of 10 in the Senate, stop wasting your time. You can't trust these Republicans. It's going to be Lucy in the football. We can do this ourselves. Yeah. We don't need them. And then once it became clear that the deal was going to get struck, at least an initial deal in June, the mistrust shifted from Democrats versus Republicans to progressive Democrats versus moderate Democrats. And immediately the talk was, okay, if you get this deal, we're going to hold it hostage until we pass the larger bill that we really want anyway. And then there was, and we've been dealing with the kabuki around that ever since. And what did anyone get out of that? We got months of coverage of Democrats in disarray. Biden's numbers tanked 10 points, culminating in the loss of the Virginia governorship. And only after that point did trust make a comeback, where Jayapal, the head of the Progressive Caucus, said, hey, I looked these moderates in the eye, the House moderates, looked them in the eye. They told me they were going to commit to passing the larger bill in a couple weeks. And I took their word on that, which is exactly what they said they could not do and should not do in June. They literally said, we can't trust these people. We got to hold this hostage to make sure they do the right thing. Jayapal drops that weapon under pressure from Pelosi and Biden, but still she actively said, I trust these people. Now Pelosi, she knows that Jayapal's not getting every last Democrat, every last progressive. There's still going to be a few holdouts, end up being 6. She had to trust that when she put that bill on the floor, that some Republicans were going to show up after a period of time when they weren't showing up. When Brian Fitzpatrick, the head of the Republican problem solvers, the bipartisan caucus, he wasn't saying, I got him, don't worry, we're going to be there for you. He wasn't saying that. He never said that publicly. I don't know what he said to Pelosi privately, but apparently she felt, I got at least 10 here. I can move ahead. And they came through. The Republicans were the margin of victory in both the Senate and the House for the infrastructure bill. And in my piece, I quote people saying, you can't trust them. They'll never do that. They'll never save the bill. Well, they did. My question is this the ice break that leads to more bipartisanship? I'm not optimistic about that, quite frankly, because there's nothing else in the queue. There's nothing else that's being worked on right now that you'd feel confident about. But if these 13 Republicans are not stripped of their committee assignments, which looks like they won't be, and they recognize, what, these people are yelling at me on the phone, but they're a bunch of Bannites from far-flung areas. My district's happy with it. Mitch McConnell's happy with it. And you know what? We're probably winning the midterms anyway. This is not going to. Yeah. There's this charge that we're giving Democrats a lifeline. Look, they're pretty screwed in one of their best case scenarios, because just they have to lose a handful of seats to lose Congress, at least lose the House, and they can have an above average 2022 and still lose the House. 1994, August of 1994, Republicans were the margin of victory for the crime bill. They saved the crime bill because a bunch of Democrats didn't vote for it. And Clinton tried desperately to say, Washington's working again. We're pulling people together. We're doing things that the public wants. And they got their asses kicked 3 months later. So, it might well have been good for the people who took the vote in their districts, but the broader picture was still favorable to Republicans, kicking Democrats in the teeth. So, I think McConnell is recognizing that. McConnell's like, look, this is good for Kentucky. And I think I said this in the last show. Virginia. I mean, when McAuliffe won Virginia 8 years ago, it's when Republicans shut down the government and looked like idiots. This time around, they didn't do anything stupid like that. They could have shut down the government in September. They had the opportunity to. They said, nah, we'll keep it open. We'll let you have the Highway Trust Fund extended. We're not going to be total nihilists here. And they could take advantage of the pendulum swing without being extreme. And so a vote like this arguably is within that mindset, that kind of framework.
I think that's right. So inflation, how concerned, is this transitory? Is this still just based on COVID, or is this the product of government pumping trillions of dollars into the economy?
Well, I'm not an economist, so I can't disentangle what happened to the economy from
First
the
you tell me you're not a lawyer. You're not an expert on the law. Now you're saying you're not an economist. What do you do?
I'm not a politician, man. I really can't talk about politics with any kind of expertise, but I do drink alcohol, so I have this to say to you. Look, I mean, there'll be economists, I'm sure, for years trying to analyze what was the source of inflation. Was it supply chain disruption? Was it semiconductor shortage or other supply shortages? Or was it that Democrats overshot and put too much money into the economy with the American Rescue Plan, gave people too many checks, and so on and so forth? I don't know the answer to that. I do know that it won't be hard for Republicans to say it's all of your Democratic spending that did this to us, especially if it continues into 2022. So, you look at the infrastructure bill, which is largely paid for. I think even Manchin thinks that the CBO score is a little ungenerous, that it would be fully paid for when you take into account economic stimulation. And you got a Build Back Better bill, which Democrats are saying is paid for. But on one hand, may not be paid for in the initial years because there may be more upfront spending, and only catches up with tax revenue in the so-called out years, past 2025, 2026. But also, from an annual spending standpoint, if it's a 1.75 trillion bill over 10 years, that's $175 billion a year. In a $20 trillion economy, that's a drop in the bucket. So it really shouldn't mean all that much additional stimulus. But how many butts I can put into one chain of thought? If you're a fire chief and a house is on fire, and you say, "Well, I only added one scrap of paper to the fire. I didn't cause the fire." People still be mad at you that you didn't put out the fire. People want to see inflation be tamed, and so Build Back Better is not going to tame inflation. It may not be a major contributor to inflation, or a contributor at all, but it's not going to solve it in and of itself. So I think Democrats have to be careful that they're doing what they can on inflation. And it may be that they can't do that much themselves. That's why they're trying to fix supply chain problems. It may be it's on the Fed's shoulders to do it. Fed's got to be the bad guy. And have interest rates, even though it makes people mad. But they're definitely potentially exposed in 2022 if inflation is still kicking. And progressives want to argue, this is media hype. This is what conservatives always do to make sure we don't do things. And I think they need to be a little more worried that what they have done, fairly or unfairly, will be blamed for inflation. If they want more of those policies to be replicated in the future, they need to do everything they can so that it doesn't get blamed for that.
I mean, this is like, this hits home. I mean, I can tell you, like when I lived in the DC area, I would walk all the time and take the metro, right? But like out here, you gotta drive. I drive, sometimes I drive a couple hours a day. Gas prices are up 50%. Like, I don't know whose fault that is. I'm not sure why it's happening, but that's the kind of thing everybody can understand. And, this could be getting. I talked to David Frum was on my podcast yesterday. Check it out, youtube.com/Matt Lewis. We had a long and kind of wide ranging discussion, but one of the things he brought up was like with Reagan, and not to compare today's inflation to the 1970s, which is very different, but with Reagan, it kind of started off bad, and there was the recession in '82, but he recovered in time for '84. But like with Biden, it seems like his best economic era may be the first 6 months. And so the timing for Biden could be really bad. And Democrats, rather than sort of admitting that this is a major problem and doing what they have to do right now to fix it, are trying to postpone those big steps and hope that it solves itself. So this could end up being very damaging for Biden, deserve it or not. It could be very, very bad for his political fortunes.
Sure, but also the other way. It could be that the shots are getting into arms and supply chain issues will get resolved. If not in the next 2 months, but by November 2022. And things might look very.
Give your booster?
I'm getting my booster appointment is in 2 weeks. And my 9-year-old got her first shot, this week.
Yeah, both my kids got their first shot. I've now had fully vaccinated and the flu shot and the booster. And I have to tell you, Bill, not to discourage anybody, but the last booster really, I was still functional yesterday, but
was it the same?
I felt it.
Were all three the same shot, or did you mix and match?
Yeah, it was all Moderna.
Okay.
So I felt it yesterday. I was operating at about 70% maybe, which is still, compared to the average person, incredibly efficient.
But if the fall of 2021 is Biden's nadir, 2022 could look a lot better. But my fear at this point is 2022 looks a lot better, and it's still not good enough for Democrats. Maybe it's an above average majority for Democrats, and they only lose 10 House seats, but you would still lose the House in that circumstance. And the Senate's on such a knife's edge that a lot of any random factor, any weird candidate mismatch could lead to a 1-seat loss, and boom, you don't get any more judges. So there's all sorts of reasons for Democrats to be on edge, but also reasons why things could, they could lose the House but keep the Senate because the map is marginally favorable to Democrats.
And as I mentioned, I think the failure to recruit Sununu in New Hampshire is indicative of a Republican Party. Jonah Goldberg says that these are two parties that are both trying to be minority parties. And, Republicans had the normal Republican, Glenn Youngkin, this kind of normal Republican guy, wins in Virginia. They've got the wind at their back. And then they come out and you see the crazy again,
Yeah, I don't think it's totally fair on the Democratic side, though. I grant you that they're getting tagged with, certain extreme stuff. But, again, Biden was not the extreme ideological choice. He has resisted a number of pressures from the left, like on student debt, for example. He's accepting what Manchin wants and what Sinema wants in this Build Back Better bill. It's already half the size of what it was. There are a whole bunch of Democrats that won mayoral elections last week pushing against defund the police. Police-friendly moderate one in Seattle, in all places. A ballot initiative to literally eliminate the current police department of Minneapolis and replace it with the Department of Public Safety failed by a pretty considerable margin, and the mayoral candidate, the incumbent mayor who was against that proposal, he won re-election too. And the socialists in Buffalo got beat by the incumbent Democrat centrist, backed by Republican money. He won as a write-in by about 18 points. So I don't see Democrats actively trying. I mean, even McAuliffe. McAuliffe, I think, did get caught up in educational culture wars there, well beyond critical race theory. But he was not the most left-wing candidate in that primary. And he was begging Democrats to pass infrastructure and decouple it from Build Back Better. So I don't think the Democratic Party as a whole is racing to go to the farthest left extreme. But they are a ideological diverse party, and they're having to navigate those cross currents.
Well, I think we talked about this before, but I think part of the problem Democrats have is that, like, the media and the left on Twitter, academia, Hollywood, sports are their version of Donald Trump. And so a lot of times a lot of times we conflate what the left does or says, the media, the cultural, institutions, Hollywood, academia. We conflate what they do with what they do and say with the quote Democrats, and it's not entirely fair. Although I would say that they tend to drive the energy, and it's in the Democratic Party, and it's hard to ignore them when they're everywhere, when you cannot avoid them, and they're really dominating the culture. So I think a lot of the criticism, though, of Democrats is more accurately criticism of the left on Twitter. But I don't think it's nut picking, what David French talks about. I don't think this is me going and finding some random Yahoo who said something crazy and holding that against the Democratic Party. I mean, we're seeing, very prominent people time and again say and do crazy things that I think turn off the electorate and turn off suburban voters in places like Virginia.
Well, I'm curious what happens with both parties at this point, because we have two recent votes in the House where the AOC position was shown to be an extremely marginal position inside the Democratic caucus. One was the Iron Dome vote, and now the infrastructure vote, where I forget how many holdouts were on Iron Dome, but it was, I don't know if it was as many as 6 or less, but it was very, very small. And Jayapal has, in the last few months, has been much more the public face of House progressives than AOC has been. And we'll see how much she sustains. Progressives have been enthusiastic about her when she was holding the line. We'll see how much they feel about her now that she has reached out to the moderates. That will show, she has to have that Manchin and Sinema don't backstab her. I think Manchin and Sinema, I don't think it's in their interest to kill this bill and ruin the trust that's been built, because that would really be terrible for the Democratic Party, and if the mistrust would explode if that was the case. So I think it is still going to pass, and I think Jayapal will be credited for helping move the ball forward. And so does that make her a more influential figure, more defining of the left edge than AOC, who is seen as a leader of literally a faction of 6? And on the Republican side, as angry as Trump has been, as horrible as Paul Gosar has been, I think Paul Gosar's rhetoric and Taylor Greene's rhetoric, I think, are not just horrible, but I think more relevant than random people on the left on Twitter. I mean, these are elected officials. But
I think culture is more important than politics.
But is the Republican Party going to get more defined by Glenn Youngkin and Mitch McConnell than it is by Trump and by Green and by Gosar, because they're the ones who are actually winning and getting stuff done? Are there more Republicans who are going to talk open about 2024, whether or not Trump runs, because they say, you know what, the bond of Trump and the party is starting to weaken. Youngkin he needed Trump voters, but didn't need Trump. And he walked that line successfully, and we can walk that line too. Is there going to be any kind of recalibration on the Republican side going forward here? That, to me, is an unknown.
Yeah, look, I think always sadly, in this environment, just bet on the crazy. But having said that, I do take a little bit of comfort in the fact that I would say in the past year, both sides have both sides are better than they were a year ago, probably, and there is more reason to believe that we could have some return to normalcy and the empire strikes back kind of situation. The establishment strikes back. But my bias is always toward believing that the left and the right, that the game is sort of rigged in their favor right now, including the perverse incentives and the media attention, and the changes that we've seen with social media benefit them. But I do agree that there is increased reason for optimism.
Should we end on that optimistic note?
I think we should. Let's take an optimistic note while we briefly have it. Oh, Bill, I wanted to mention, I'm going to get you on the record here.
All right.
We have not done our DM Zoom in a couple weeks. And I think that there's a sense that I am a problem. And in fairness, oftentimes I have been, but this week it's you and I both. Can I get you to agree that you also had scheduling?
Yeah, I'm out of town Friday, and I can't Zoom Friday. So this week is 100% on me. I don't even know what's going on in your life, but I'll take the blame for this one. But systematically, you are the bigger problem. You're not
agree.
You're not making the time, Matt. You got to make the time.
I just want to point out that it's not just me, but I've been the major problem. So hopefully we will get a Zoom. You know what? Maybe a Thanksgiving themed. I guess we missed our chance to do a Halloween to do our Halloween costume, but we got to do one soon. Hopefully, maybe next week. I'm not sure. Now, 1 week I'm going to be out on a Friday to celebrate. My wife and I are going to go out for our anniversary and leave the kids and not on their own, hopefully. But maybe we could even do noon that day if we'll see. We'll hash it out. But we do want to do another DM Zoom conversation with the supporters of us soon.
Absolutely. Anything else to plug?
Yeah, just read my stuff at The Beast and check out the YouTube interviews. Like I say, I just interviewed David Fromm, and you can see it at youtube.com/Matt Lewis. Check it out.
I had a piece of the Monthly earlier this week about Glenn Youngkin's victory and voting rights, how this is an argument for Republicans to get on board with voting rights since he won going away. No, he won with a very liberal voting rights regime in place in Virginia. No voter ID, easy, lots of early voting, ex-felons
and lots of voting.
I mean, high turnout
and lots of voters.
That's right. So there are low propensity Republican voters that can take advantage of these things, perhaps in time for 2022 when the pendulum swing is likely going to go their way. So now is the time for Republicans to want to do this.
Not to mention all the convicted felons who wear red MAGA hats.
That's white males. Young white males are your ex-felon constituency.
They're the Trump vote. They're the number one Trump voter. Maybe not number one, but they're there. They're part of the broader coalition, Bill. We're a very inclusive, big tent party.
The felon population is heavily white, non-college males. There are lots of Trump voters.
There you go.
All right.
You go.
So check out the Monthly, and we will talk at least in the DMZ next week, and hopefully in the DMZ Zoom next week.
All right. See you, Bill.
Bye-bye.